BTW, Sarah and I are having some friends over next weekend. Try to keep the noise down when you move in. Marcus read the message at a red light and shook his head. His brother was already trying to establish dominance, to make it clear who really controlled the brownstone. But David had made a crucial error. He'd underestimated Marcus, just as he always had. As the light turned green and Marcus accelerated, the Lamborghini's engine singing its mechanical song, he thought about the week ahead. He had arrangements to make, calls to place, and a move to coordinate. But more than that, he had a point. To prove, the drive back to his temporary apartment in Manhattan took him through the Bronx and down the FDR Drive. The city skyline rose before him, glass and steel monuments to ambition and achievement. Somewhere in Brooklyn Heights, a brownstone waited with 2 parking spots that legally belonged to both brothers equally. David might have possession for now, but possession, as Marcus had learned in his medical ethics classes, wasn't always 9/10 of the law. Sometimes it was just a temporary state, waiting to be corrected. As he pulled into the underground parking garage of his current building, Marcus was already formulating a plan. It would have to be careful, legal, and executed with the same precision he brought to the operating room. David had drawn first blood by refusing to share what was rightfully both of theirs. But if Marcus had learned anything from their grandfather, it was that the best response to a bully wasn't backing down, it was standing up with style. The Lamborghini's engine ticked as it cooled, its orange paint glowing under the garage's fluorescent lights. In a week, this car would need a new home, a safe place where it could be properly protected and maintained. And Marcus intended to make sure it got exactly what it deserved, even if it meant teaching his older brother a lesson in the process. He locked the car and headed for the elevator, his mind already working through the details. David had made his choice, and now Marcus would make his. The game was on, and for the first time in his life, Marcus held the better cards. The elevator doors closed on the sight of the Lamborghini sitting alone in its spot, waiting. Just like Marcus was waiting. But not for long. The following week arrived with unseasonable warmth for early April in New York. Marcus stood outside the Brooklyn Heights brownstone, surrounded by cardboard boxes and furniture wrapped in protective plastic. The moving truck idled at the curb, its diesel engine rumbling like a restless beast. The Georgian-style building rose 4 stories above him, its red brick facade and ornate cornices speaking to an elegance from another era. This had been his grandfather's first major real estate investment, purchased when the neighborhood was still considered risky. Now, it was one of the most desirable areas in Brooklyn. Marcus checked his watch, 10:47 a.m. David's BMW was gone, presumably at his marketing firm's office in Manhattan, but Sarah's white Range Rover sat prominently in one of the 2 parking spots behind the building, visible through the wrought iron gate that separated the small private lot from the street. The second spot, where David's BMW usually resided, sat empty and inviting. "Where do you want the bedroom set?" called out Tony, the lead mover, a stocky man with forearms like ham hocks and a Brooklyn accent thick enough to cut. "Garden level, master bedroom, the room with the bay windows," Marcus replied, handing him a floor plan he'd annotated. "I've labeled everything to make it easier." Tony studied the plan and nodded approvingly. "You're the most organized client we've had all month, Doc. Usually, people just point and panic." As the movers began unloading, Marcus walked around to the back of the building to survey the parking situation. The lot was small but well maintained, with space for exactly 2 vehicles. A painted sign on the brick wall read "Private Parking Residence Only" in faded white letters. Each spot was roughly the same size, though the one currently occupied by Sarah's Range Rover was slightly closer to the building's rear entrance. Marcus took photos from multiple angles, documenting the setup. Lisa had advised him to keep records of everything, just in case the situation escalated. He was still hoping it wouldn't come to that, but David's radio silence over the past week hadn't been encouraging. Marcus had sent 2 emails proposing various sharing arrangements, alternating days, assigned weeks, even offering to pay a reasonable fee for regular access. All had gone unanswered. The back door of the brownstone opened, and Sarah emerged, dressed in yoga attire that probably cost more than most people's entire wardrobe. She clutched a titanium water bottle and her ever-present phone, thumb scrolling even as she walked. "Marcus," she said, her tone suggesting she'd just noticed something unpleasant on her shoe. "I didn't realize you were moving in today." "David didn't mention it? I sent him the schedule last week." Sarah's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, he's been so busy with the Morrison account." You know how it is in the real world: deadlines, actual responsibilities. She paused, letting the dig sink in. Not like the hospital where everything runs on its own schedule. Marcus bit back his response about 18-hour shifts and life-or-death decisions. He'd learned that arguing with Sarah was like performing surgery with a butter knife, messy and pointless. I noticed the second spot is free, he said instead, keeping his voice neutral. I thought I'd test the Lamborghini's fit, make sure there's enough clearance. Sarah's eyes narrowed. That's David's spot. It's a shared space, according to the will. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Yes, I've heard that before, Marcus interrupted. But the actual law says differently. I'm not trying to cause problems, Sarah. I just need a safe place to park a vehicle that's worth more than most people's houses. Sarah adjusted her designer sunglasses, though the sun was barely peeking through the clouds. Have you considered a private garage? There's one 3 blocks away that specializes in luxury vehicles, climate-controlled, 24-hour security. Very exclusive. At $800 a month, Marcus replied. For a parking spot I already own half of. Cone, Sarah corrected. And David's been maintaining these spots for 2 years. The seal coating, the line painting, the snow removal, all of which are tax-deductible property improvements that increase both our equity, Marcus countered. I'm happy to reimburse half of any documented expenses. Sarah's laugh was like ice-cracking. How generous. Tell me, Marcus, what's it like living in a fantasy world where everything is fair and balanced? Must be nice. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from David, at office. Sarah says you're hassling her about parking. This is exactly why I didn't want you moving in. Stop harassing my wife or we'll have bigger problems. Marcus showed the phone to Sarah. Hassling? We're having a civil conversation about shared property. David's very protective, Sarah said, her smile turning predatory. He doesn't like people upsetting his family, especially his little brother, who thinks a fancy car entitles him to special treatment. The movers continued their work, carrying boxes and furniture into the garden apartment, oblivious to the tension crackling in the spring air. Marcus noticed Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who lived next door, watching from her window. The neighborhood had eyes, which meant whatever happened here would become tomorrow's gossip. I don't want special treatment, Marcus said, pocketing his phone. I want equal treatment. There's a difference. Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice. Let me explain something to you, Marcus. David and I have built a life here. We have routines, systems, a way of doing things that works. You coming in here with your flashy car and your demands is disruptive. Disruptive isn't welcome. My grandfather, your grandfather, is dead, Sarah said flatly. And whatever special relationship you think you had with him doesn't mean anything anymore. David's the older brother, the responsible one, the one who stayed. You're just the prodigal son with a new toy. The cruelty of her words hit harder than Marcus expected. He thought of his grandfather, of their long phone conversations during Marcus's residency. How the old man would laugh at Marcus's stories from the ER and share his own tales from the car business. James Chen had understood that love wasn't measured in proximity. Yo doc. Tony's voice cut through the tension. Where do you want this? He was holding a wrapped painting, one of Marcus's few splurges during residency. An original piece by a Brooklyn artist that had caught his eye. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn of the Westchester estate as Marcus Chen stood in the driveway, holding the keys to his late grandfather's prized possession, a pristine 2019 Lamborghini Huracan Performante Inarancio, Borealis Orange. The car gleamed like liquid fire in the early light, its aggressive lines and carbon fiber accents a testament to Italian engineering at its finest. Marcus ran his hand along the hood, still unable to believe this machine was now his. I still can't believe Grandpa left this to you, his older brother David said from behind him, his voice carrying a barely concealed edge of resentment. David leaned against his own car, a respectable but unremarkable BMW 5 Series, arms crossed over his chest. You barely even visited him the last few years. Marcus turned to face his brother, noting the familiar look of disapproval that had become David's default expression whenever they interacted. At 32, David was 5 years older and had always acted like those years gave him authority over every aspect of Marcus's life. I was finishing my residency at Johns Hopkins, David. Grandpa understood that. We talked every week. Phone calls aren't the same as being there, David shot back. I was the one who took him to his doctor's appointments, helped him with his finances, made sure he took his medications. The accusation stung, but Marcus held his tongue. Their grandfather, James Chen, had been a self-made millionaire who'd built his fortune through a chain of luxury car dealerships across the East Coast. He'd always had a special bond with Marcus, perhaps seeing in his younger grandson the same restless ambition that had driven him to success. The Lamborghini had been his personal car, purchased on his 75th birthday as a gift to himself, a reminder that age was just a number. "Look, I'm not trying to fight about this," Marcus said, pocketing the keys. "Grandpa made his choices. I'm just grateful he thought of me." David's jaw tightened. "Right. Well, just remember that some of us have been here all along, maintaining the family properties, dealing with the real responsibilities while you were off playing doctor." The comment revealed the heart of David's resentment. As the older son, David had expected to inherit the Lamborghini or at least have first choice of their grandfather's possessions. Instead, the will had been specific. The Huracan went to Marcus, along with a letter explaining that he wanted his younger grandson to have something that would remind him to enjoy life, not just work through it. Marcus decided to change the subject. "Speaking of family properties, I wanted to talk to you about the brownstone." Their grandfather had also left them a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a property he'd purchased in the 1980s that was now worth several $1,000,000. The brothers had agreed to share it, with David living on the upper 2 floors, and Marcus taking the garden apartment and basement level when he moved back to New York to start his position at Mount Sinai Hospital. "What about it?" David asked, his tone suspicious. "I'm moving in next week. I just wanted to confirm the parking situation." "Grandpa mentioned there were 2 spots in the back." "There are," David interrupted. "I'm using them." Marcus blinked. "Both of them? I need one for the BMW and one for Sarah's Range Rover," David explained, referring to his wife. "We've been using both spots for the past 2 years. But I'll need a spot for the Lamborghini," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice reasonable. "Surely we can figure out an arrangement. Maybe alternate days, or that's not going to work." "For us," David cut him off. "Sarah uses her car every day for her real estate business, and I need reliable access to my vehicle. You'll have to find street parking." Marcus stared at his brother in disbelief. "Street parking? For a Lamborghini? In New York City? Do you have any idea what the insurance implications?" "Not my problem," David said with a shrug. "We've been living there, maintaining the property, paying for upkeep. The parking spots come with seniority. If you wanted guaranteed parking, maybe you should have thought about that before deciding to move back." The unfairness of it hit Marcus like a slap. The brownstone had been left to both of them equally, with specific instructions that they were to share all common areas, which certainly included the parking spots. But David was doing what he'd always done, using his position as the older brother to claim what he wanted. "The will states we share all common areas equally," Marcus pointed out, his patience wearing thin. "And we will," David replied smoothly. "You're welcome to use the spots whenever they're free." Which, admittedly, won't be often. But hey, that's city living, right? The conversation was interrupted by the sound of high heels on pavement. Sarah Chen emerged from the main house, designer sunglasses perched on her head, carrying a Louis Vuitton bag that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was the kind of woman who treated life like a business transaction, always calculating the angles. "Oh, Marcus," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "David told me you'd be here today. Congratulations on the car. It's very loud." "Thank you, Sarah," Marcus replied, noting her deliberate choice of words. Everything about Sarah was calculated for effect, from her perfectly highlighted hair to her studied casual stance. "We should get going," she told David. "The heck are expecting us at the country club for brunch?" David nodded, then turned back to Marcus. "I assume you'll want to take the car for a drive. Just be careful. Grandpa kept it in perfect condition. Would be a shame if something happened to it." The implication hung in the air, like a threat. Marcus watched as his brother and sister-in-law walked to their BMW, Sarah's heels clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that sounded like mockery. As they drove away, Marcus stood alone in the driveway, the keys to the Lamborghini weighing heavy in his pocket. He thought about his grandfather, about the man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd taught both his grandsons the value of hard work but also the importance of standing up for yourself. James Chen hadn't raised pushovers, And he certainly hadn't left Marcus the Lamborghini just to have it vandalized on a Brooklyn street. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Lisa Park, a law school friend who now specialized in property law. Lisa, it's Marcus Chen. Yeah, I'm good. Listen, I need to ask you about property rights and shared inheritance. Specifically about parking spots in a jointly owned building. As he spoke, Marcus gazed at the Lamborghini, its orange paint seeming to glow with inner fire. David might think he could push him around like he had when they were kids, but Marcus wasn't a kid anymore. He was a doctor, a professional, and now, the owner of a supercar that deserved better than street parking. The conversation with Lisa was enlightening. According to her, if the parking spots were part of the common areas mentioned in the will, then both brothers had equal claim to them. David's seniority argument held no legal water. She suggested Marcus try to resolve it amicably first, but, if that failed, he had options. After hanging up, Marcus walked around the Lamborghini one more time, admiring its sculpted lines and aggressive stance. The car represented more than just expensive machinery. It was his grandfather's final gift, a reminder to live life on his own terms. He climbed into the driver's seat, adjusting it to his position. The interior was a symphony of Alcantara and carbon fiber, with bright orange stitching that matched the exterior. When he pressed the start button, the V10 engine roared to life, with a sound that sent shivers down his spine. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement. As he pulled out of the estate's driveway, Marcus made a decision. He would try one more time to reason with David, to appeal to his sense of fairness. But if his brother continued to be unreasonable, well, Marcus had learned a thing or two about standing up for himself during his years away. Medical school had taught him patience and precision, but it had also taught him that sometimes you had to fight for what was right. The Lamborghini purred as he navigated the winding roads of Westchester County. Its power barely contained beneath his right foot. Other drivers turned to stare, some with admiration, others with envy. Marcus understood now why his grandfather had bought it. It wasn't about showing off or flaunting wealth. It was about refusing to apologize for success, about taking up space in the world without shame. His phone buzzed with a text from David. Hope you're enjoying the drive. Living room, north wall. Marcus called back, grateful for the interruption. He turned back to Sarah. I'm going to park in the empty spot today, just temporarily while I unload. We can discuss a permanent arrangement when David gets home. Sarah's eyes flashed. Don't you dare, but Marcus was already walking away, heading for his temporary apartment's garage where the Lamborghini waited. He'd had enough of being pushed around, enough of being treated like an interloper in a property he partially owned. If David and Sarah wanted to play games, they'd chosen the wrong opponent. 20 minutes later, Marcus returned. The Lamborghini's engine announcing his arrival with a growl that echoed off the brownstone walls. Several neighbors emerged to watch as he carefully maneuvered the orange supercar through the gate and into the empty parking spot. It fit perfectly, with room to spare. Sarah stood on the back steps, phone pressed to her ear, presumably reporting to David. Her face had turned an interesting shade of red that clashed with her rose gold highlights. Marcus ignored her, focusing instead on the satisfied feeling of claiming what was rightfully his, even if temporarily. He was photographing the Lamborghini in the spot documentation. Always documentation, when David's BMW screeched around the corner. His brother must have broken several traffic laws to get here from Manhattan so quickly. The BMW stopped abruptly in the alley, blocking the entrance to the parking area. David emerged from his car like a storm cloud taking human form. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, his face flushed with anger. Move it, now. Hello to you too, Marcus said calmly, continuing to take photos. Nice of you to finally respond to my messages. In person, even. This isn't a joke. Marcus, move the damn car. I'm unloading today. The spot was empty. I'm not seeing the problem. David stepped closer, his fists clenched. For a moment, Marcus thought his brother might actually take a swing. They hadn't fought physically since they were teenagers, but the old dynamics were all still there, simmering beneath their adult veneers. The problem, David said through gritted teeth, is that you think you can waltz in here and disrupt our lives because Grandpa gave you his stupid car. The problem, Marcus countered, is that you think you can claim sole ownership of shared property because you got here first. That's not how inheritance law works. Don't lecture me about law. I've been dealing with real estate for years while you were playing doctor. There it was again playing Dr. Vlog, as if saving lives was somehow less valuable than selling office spaces. Marcus felt his own anger rising but kept it controlled. Clinical, I'm not playing anything, David. I'm moving into my legal residence and parking in a spot I partially own. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you review the will. Sarah had descended the steps to stand beside her husband, a united front against the interloper. David, honey, let's just call the police. He's trespassing on my own property. Marcus laughed. Please do. I'd love to see how that plays out. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but Tony the mover chose that moment to intervene. Hey folks, I hate to interrupt, but we've got another job after this, and we need to keep unloading. Maybe you could move the Beamer so we can get the truck closer. David's face darkened further at having his BMW called a Beamer by a mover, but he grudgingly returned to his car and pulled it into the alley proper, parking it at an angle that partially blocked traffic. Within minutes, a parking enforcement officer appeared, drawn by some mysterious New York City instinct for improperly parked vehicles. You can't park here, the officer said, already pulling out his ticket pad. I live here, David protested. I'm just loading zone is back there. The officer pointed. This is a fire lane. Move it or I write it up. David's jaw clenched as he looked between the officer, the ticket pad, and Marcus, who was trying very hard not to smile. With no other choice, David moved the BMW down the block to a metered spot, feeding quarters into the machine with the expression of someone swallowing medicine. When he returned, Marcus had already directed the movers to use the back entrance, making the unloading process much more efficient. The Lamborghini sat in the parking spot like a Pazotic bird that had decided to nest in a pigeon coop, impossible to ignore and undeniably magnificent. This isn't over, David said quietly as he passed Marcus on the steps. It doesn't have to be anything, Marcus replied. Just share the spots like the will specifies. It's not complicated. Everything's complicated with you, David muttered, disappearing inside with Sarah. The rest of the move proceeded without major incident, though Marcus could feel eyes watching from the upper floor windows. By late afternoon, his apartment was filled with boxes and furniture, the beginning of a new chapter in a space that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. As evening approached, Marcus made one last trip to the parking area. The Lamborghini would need to be moved soon. He'd made his point, and keeping it there overnight would only escalate tensions. But as he approached, he stopped short. Someone had keyed the passenger door. The scratch wasn't deep, but it was deliberate, a straight line about 6 inches long that caught the fading light like an accusation. Marcus knelt beside it, running his finger along the damage. The rage that filled him was cold and precise, the kind he'd learned to channel in the operating room, when everything was going wrong and only steady hands could save the day. He looked up at the brownstone windows, but all the curtains were drawn. No witnesses, no proof, just a clear message. This is what happens when you don't fall in line. Marcus took photos of the damage from every angle, then called his insurance company to start a claim. The representative CST sympathetically when he explained the situation. Vandalism claims on luxury vehicles were depressingly common in the city. Next, he called Lisa Park. They keyed it, he said without preamble when she answered. Document everything, she replied immediately. Time, date, photos. Did you see who did it? No, but we both know. Knowing and proving are different things. But this changes the situation. Vandalism is criminal. Do you want to file a police report? Marcus considered it. A police report would escalate things dramatically, potentially fracturing the family permanently. But doing nothing would only encourage more of the same. Not yet, he decided. But I want options. Smart. Keep the evidence. Continue documenting everything. And Marcus, move the car tonight. Don't give them another opportunity. After hanging up, Marcus stood in the gathering dusk, looking at his grandfather's car now, his car, wounded by petty jealousy. He thought about what James Chen would do in this situation. The old man had been tough but fair, strategic but never cruel. He'd built his empire not by crushing opponents but by outmaneuvering them. An idea began to form in Marcus's mind. David thought he held all the cards because he'd been here longer, because he had Sarah as an ally, because he was willing to play dirty. But Marcus had resources of his own, and more importantly, he had the law on his side. He moved the Lamborghini that night, taking it to a secure garage a friend had recommended. It would cost him, but it was temporary. just until he could implement his plan. As he handed over the keys to the garage attendant, Marcus made a mental note to call his friend from residency, the one who worked at the exotic car dealership in Queens, and his cousin who owned a towing company, and the contractor who'd renovated his apartment in Baltimore. David wanted to play hardball, fine, but he'd forgotten one crucial thing about his little brother. Marcus had spent years learning how to operate under pressure, how to think strategically when stakes were high, how to remain calm when others were losing their heads. The game was no longer about parking spots. It was about respect, fairness, and standing up to bullies, even when they shared your DNA, especially then. As Marcus walked back to the brownstone through the Brooklyn Heights streets, past million townhomes and carefully maintained gardens, he felt a strange sense of clarity. The neighborhood was peaceful in the evening light, but beneath that peace lay the usual urban tensions: property disputes, family feuds, the eternal struggle for space and status in a city that never had enough of either. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Marcus Chen was exactly where he needed to be, in his new home, with a plan forming and the determination to see it through. His brother had drawn first blood, literally scratching a line in the sand. Now it was Marcus's turn to respond. The morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical for mid-April in New York. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, sipping Ethiopian coffee from his grandfather's favorite mug, one of the few personal items he'd claimed from the estate. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could see both parking spots occupied, David's BMW in one, Sarah's Range Rover in the other, positioned deliberately to take up maximum space. It had been 3 days since the keying incident. 3 days of careful planning, phone calls, and arrangements. Marcus had maintained perfect civility during the brief encounters with his brother in the hallway, offering pleasant greetings that were met with stony silence. Let David think he'd won. Let him believe Marcus had retreated with his tail between his legs. His phone buzzed with a text from Jake Morrison, his cousin who owned Morrison Towing and Recovery. Trucks in position. Waiting for your signal. Marcus smiled, setting down his mug. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing property law with Lisa, confirming every detail. The parking spots were indeed common areas under the will's terms, meaning both brothers had equal right to their use. More importantly, vehicles illegally occupying shared spaces could be removed at the co-owner's discretion, just as a landlord could tow unauthorized cars from private property. He'd even had Lisa draft a formal notice, which he'd slipped under David's door. At 6 a.m. the legal requirement for notification had been met, even if David hadn't seen it yet. Another text, this one from Carlos, his friend at Exotic Euromotors. Your baby's ready. Fresh paint job, looks factory perfect. Will deliver as discussed. The scratch had been repaired by the best in the business, erasing David's petty vandalism, as if it had never happened. But Marcus hadn't forgotten. The invoice for the repair, $3,200 for specialized paint matching and blending, was carefully filed with the photos of the damage. Evidence for future use, if necessary. Marcus dressed carefully in jeans and a Johns Hopkins medical sweatshirt, casual enough for a Saturday morning but bearing the subtle reminder of his credentials. Details mattered in psychological warfare, a lesson learned from watching his grandfather negotiate deals. James Chen had taught him that winning wasn't about force, it was about positioning. At exactly 9 a.m., Marcus walked to the back parking area. David's BMW sat there like a blue metal assertion of dominance, deliberately parked at an angle that made it impossible for another car to fit comfortably in the second space. Sarah's Range Rover was gone, her Saturday morning Pilates class, if Marcus's reconnaissance was correct. He pulled out his phone and typed a single word to Jake, now. Within minutes, the rumble of a heavy-duty tow truck echoed through the narrow alley. Jake Morrison himself was at the wheel, a mountain of a man with arms covered in maritime tattoos from his Navy days. He backed the truck up with practiced precision, its warning beeper cutting through the Saturday morning quiet. Morning, cause, Jake said, stepping down from the cab. This the problem vehicle, the BMW, yes, Marcus confirmed, handing over the paperwork Lisa had prepared. Illegally occupying shared property despite formal notice. The co-owner, that's MIS, exercising right of removal. Jake whistled low. Fancy car. Your brother's not going to be happy. Happiness isn't my concern. Legal parking is. As Jake began positioning the truck's wheel lift, Marcus heard the back door slam open. David emerged in pajama pants and a wrinkled t-shirt, his hair sticking up at odd angles, His face went from confusion to fury in the span of a heartbeat. "What the hell are you doing?" David shouted, racing down the steps barefoot, ignoring the wet pavement. "Good morning, David," Marcus said pleasantly. "I'm clearing illegally parked vehicles from our shared parking area. You'll find the formal notice under your door. Timestamped 6:07 a.m. You can't tow my car from my own parking spot." "Our parking spot," Marcus corrected. "And since you've refused to share it as the will requires, you're technically trespassing on my property. Jake here has all the necessary permits and authorization." Jake, who'd dealt with plenty of angry vehicle owners in his career, continued his work unperturbed. The BMW's front wheels were already off the ground, the tow truck's hydraulics whining as they lifted. "This is insane." David pulled out his phone, presumably to call the police. "You're committing grand theft auto." "Actually," said a new voice, from the alley entrance, "he's executing a lawful removal of unauthorized property." Lisa Park stepped into view, immaculate in a charcoal suit despite the Saturday morning hour. She'd agreed to be present as Marcus's legal counsel, anticipating exactly this reaction. "Who the hell are you?" David demanded. "Lisa Park, attorney at law," she said, handing David her business card. "I'm representing Dr. Chen in this matter. All actions being taken are fully compliant with New York State property law and the specific terms of your grandfather's will. If you'd like to discuss the matter further, I suggest you contact your own attorney." David's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "Where are you taking my car?" "To a secure lot," Jake answered, finishing the hookup. "You can retrieve it during business hours. There's a $350 towing fee, plus daily storage. We take cash or card." As the BMW was pulled fully onto the truck bed, Sarah's Range Rover appeared at the alley entrance, unable to proceed with the tow truck blocking the way. She lowered her window, designer sunglasses reflecting the gray sky. "David, what's happening?" "Your brother-in-law is happening," David snarled. "He's stealing my car." "Relocating," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." Sarah's expression cycled through several emotions before settling on cold fury. She threw the Range Rover into reverse, disappearing back onto the street with a screech of tires. Marcus knew she'd circle the block, looking for parking, growing angrier with each failed attempt. Saturday mornings in Brooklyn Heights were notoriously difficult for street parking. "You've made a huge mistake," David said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You have no idea what you've just started." "I've started nothing," Marcus replied calmly. "I've simply responded to your aggression with legal remedies." "You keyed my car, prove it," David snapped. "And refused to share property we both own. Actions have consequences." "David, you taught me that when we were kids, remember?" Jake had finished securing the BMW and was climbing back into the tow truck's cab. "All set. 'Cause you want me to wait for the other vehicle?" "No, one's sufficient for now," Marcus said. "Thanks, Jake." As the tow truck rumbled away with David's BMW, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered. Drawn by the commotion, Mrs. Rodriguez stood on her stoop, coffee mug in hand, watching the drama unfold with undisguised interest. A couple walking their golden doodle had stopped to observe. In a neighborhood where privacy was currency, public disputes were social gold. David seemed to realize this, his fury temporarily checked by embarrassment. "Everyone go home," he shouted at the onlookers. "Show's over." "Actually," Marcus said, pulling out his phone, "it's just beginning." "Carlos." "Yeah, bring her home." Within 10 minutes, another rumble filled the alley, this one higher-pitched and distinctly Italian. The Lamborghini Huracan appeared like a sunrise, its repaired orange paint gleaming despite the overcast sky. Carlos was at the wheel, handling the supercar with the reverence it deserved. "Where do you want her, Doc?" Carlos asked, stepping out with a grin. "Right there." Marcus pointed to the spot David's BMW had occupied moments before. "Dead center, please." As Carlos maneuvered the Lamborghini into position, Sarah reappeared on foot. Having apparently given up on finding street parking, her yoga composure had cracked, replaced by something raw. "You vindictive little language, Sarah," Lisa interrupted smoothly. "There are witnesses present, and defamation is actionable." The Lamborghini settled into its spot like a king, claiming a throne. Carlos handed Marcus the keys with a small bow, then jogged to a following sedan driven by one of his employees. The supercar looked almost alien in the modest brownstone setting, a violence of orange against old brick. There, Marcus said, admiring the sight. One car, one spot. Perfectly legal, perfectly fair. You and Sarah are welcome to share the other spot however you see fit. David's hands were trembling, whether from rage or the cold rain on his bare feet. Marcus couldn't tell. You think you've won something here? I think I've parked my car in a spot I partially own, Marcus replied. Winning would imply this was a competition. It's not. It's simply the law. Lisa stepped forward, addressing both David and Sarah. My client is prepared to discuss reasonable sharing arrangements for both parking spots, as the will intended. However, any further vandalism, harassment, or illegal occupation of shared spaces will be met with appropriate legal action. This includes potential criminal charges for the previous damage to the Lamborghini. We didn't touch his stupid car, Sarah protested. Security footage from the business across the alley suggests otherwise, Lisa said smoothly. This was a bluff, had checked, and the camera angles didn't quite cover the parking area, but David and Sarah didn't know that, and the seed of doubt was planted. I need to get my car back, David said, his voice strained. Morrison Towing is open until 2 p.m. on Saturdays, Marcus offered helpfully. They're over in Red Hook. Fair. Warning Jake mentioned they only take cash on weekends. The rain had picked up, creating small rivers along the alley's worn pavement. David stood there getting soaked, his thin t-shirt clinging to his frame, while Sarah huddled under the small overhang by the back door. The contrast with Marcus, dry under his umbrella, and Lisa, professionally composed despite the weather, was stark. This isn't over, David said finally, the fight seeming to drain out of him. It can be, Marcus countered. Agree to a fair sharing arrangement alternating weeks, assigned days, whatever works and this all goes away. Keep playing games, and he gestured at the empty spot where the BMW had been. David turned without another word and stalked back into the brownstone, leaving wet footprints on the steps. Sarah followed, but not before shooting Marcus a look that could have curdled milk. When they were gone, Lisa turned to Marcus. That went better than expected? No physical violence, no arrests. I'd call it a win. It's not about winning, Marcus said, still looking at the Lamborghini in its rightful place. It's about fairness. Lisa smiled. In my experience, those are often the same thing. Just watch your back, Marcus. Cornered animals do desperate things. After Lisa left, Marcus spent a few minutes simply admiring the scene. The Lamborghini sat perfectly centered in its spot, rain beating on its waxed surface like jewels. It wasn't just a parking space, it was a statement. David had thought he could push his little brother around, could use intimidation and vandalism to maintain his dominance. He'd thought wrong. Marcus's phone buzzed with texts from Jake. Your bro just showed up. Man is heated. Tried to negotiate the fee, but I held firm. $350 cash. Just like we discussed. Another text followed. He asked a lot of questions about, you wanted to know if this was your idea. I played dumb. Marcus smiled. David was fishing for information, trying to understand how his little brother had orchestrated such a precise counterstrike. Let him wonder. Let him realize that the quiet medical student he'd dismissed for years had learned a few things about strategy. The rain continued to fall as Marcus made his way back inside. His apartment smelled of fresh coffee and possibility. He had unpacking to finish, a life to build in this new space. But first, he pulled out his laptop and began composing an email to David. Dear David, I hope this morning's events have clarified the situation regarding our shared parking spaces. As I've stated repeatedly, I'm not seeking special treatment or trying to displace you and Sarah. I simply want fair access to property we both inherited. To that end, I propose the following arrangement. Week 1, you and Sarah have access to both spots. Week 2, I have access to one spot. You have access to one spot. This pattern continues. Alternating weekly. This ensures both parties have predictable access while respecting our equal ownership. If you prefer a different arrangement, alternating days, assigned spots, or any other equitable solution, I'm open to discussion. However, if you choose not to respond or continue denying my legal right to these spaces, I'll be forced to pursue further remedies. These may include, but are not limited to, daily alternating towing of unauthorized vehicles, filing criminal charges for the vandalism to my vehicle, seeking a formal partition action through the courts. I hope we can resolve this as adults and brothers. Grandfather would have wanted us to find a way to share what he left us, not fight over it like children. Please respond within 48 hours with your decision. Regards, Marcus, he read it over twice, ensuring the tone was firm but not inflammatory, then hit send. The ball was back in David's court, but now the rules of the game had changed. Marcus had shown he wouldn't be bullied, wouldn't accept being treated as a second-class heir to their grandfather's legacy. Outside, the Lamborghini continued its silent vigil, rain streaming off its sculpted flanks. It wasn't just a car anymore, it was a symbol of Marcus's refusal to be diminished, to accept less than what was rightfully his. The brownstone was quiet around him, but Marcus knew this was just the eye of the storm. David would regroup, possibly lawyer up, definitely plot his next move. But Marcus was ready. He'd spent years learning to function under pressure, to make life and death decisions with steady hands and clear thinking. Compared to a trauma bay on a Saturday night, a parking dispute with his brother was manageable. Different stakes, same principles. Stay calm, think ahead, and never let emotions override logic. His phone rang, an unknown number with a 718 area code. Marcus let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Dr. Chen. This is Sergeant Williams from the 84th Precinct. We've received a complaint about an illegal towing operation at your address. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. Marcus smiled, so David had called the police after all. No matter. Lisa had prepared him for this possibility. All the paperwork was in order, all actions legal and documented. Let the police come. Let them see the will, the notices, the evidence of David's refusal to share. The law was on Marcus's side. He saved the sergeant's number and made a note to call back after consulting with Lisa. Then he returned to his unpacking, pulling books from boxes and arranging them on the built-in shelves his grandfather had installed decades ago. Medical texts mixed with literature, photo albums next to surgical manuals, the accumulated knowledge and memories of a life in transition. As he worked, Marcus thought about the next steps. The parking situation was just the beginning. There were other shared spaces in the brownstone: the basement storage, the small backyard, the roof deck David had been using exclusively for his parties, all common areas that should be shared equally, according to the will, but one battle at a time. First, establish the precedent with the parking. Show David that the old dynamics no longer applied. Then, gradually, restore balance to the rest of their shared inheritance. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. Marcus walked to his window and looked out at the Lamborghini, its orange paint now glowing in the diffused light. His grandfather had loved that car, had taken meticulous care of it, had driven it on Sunday mornings when the roads were empty and you could really open up the engine. I've got it from here, Grandpa, Marcus said quietly. And I won't let anyone take what you meant for me to have. The brownstones settled around him with small creaks and sighs, as if acknowledging its newest resident's claim. Somewhere upstairs, David was probably on the phone with lawyers, friends, anyone who would listen to his outrage. But down here, in the garden apartment that smelled of fresh paint and justice, Marcus Chen was home. And he wasn't going anywhere. Brownstone's doorbell rang at 7 a.m. on Tuesday morning, 3 days after the towing incident. Marcus had been awake for an hour, reviewing patient files for his first day at Mount Sinai. Through the security monitor, he could see two figures, David in a business suit and an older man in an expensive overcoat, clearly a lawyer. Marcus opened the door, coffee mug in hand. David, and you've brought representation, I see. This is Richard Steinberg, my attorney, David said stiffly. May we come in? Of course. Marcus stepped aside, noting how David's eyes tracked across the apartment, taking in the now organized space. The place looked good: medical degrees framed on the walls. Furniture arranged to maximize the garden apartment's natural light, fresh flowers on the dining table. It looked like someone lived here, really lived here, not just crashed between hospital shifts. They sat in the living room, Steinberg pulling out a leather portfolio while David perched on the edge of his chair like he might need to flee at any moment. The lawyer was everything Marcus expected: silver-haired, sharpened, with the kind of tan that came from winter trips to Miami Beach. Dr. Chen, Steinberg began, I've reviewed the situation, and I believe we can reach an amicable solution that serves everyone's interests. I'm listening, Marcus said, settling back in his grandfather's old reading chair, another inheritance that had found its way to him. First, let me say that your actions on Saturday, while perhaps legally permissible, were unnecessarily aggressive, towing your brother's vehicle after he vandalized mine and refused multiple reasonable offers to share. Marcus interrupted. Context matters, counselor. Steinberg's smile was practiced. Be that as it may, we're here to move forward, not relitigate the past. My client is prepared to offer a compromise. David finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. We'll agree to a schedule. You can have one spot every other week. That's it, take it or leave it. Marcus sipped his coffee, letting the silence stretch. He'd learned this technique from his grandfather. Sometimes the best negotiation tactic was saying nothing at all. That's less than what I proposed in my email, Marcus finally said. I offered alternating weeks where you'd have both spots. Half the time, you're countering with me having one spot a quarter of the time. How is that fair? It's fair because we've been here longer, David snapped. Because we've maintained the property, dealt with the tenants upstairs, handled everything, while you were off playing Dr. Marcus finished. You keep saying that like it's an insult. I was training to save lives, David. What's insulting about that? Steinberg raised a manicured hand. Gentlemen, please. Let's focus on solutions. He pulled out a document. We've drafted an agreement that would formalize the parking arrangement. Every other week, Dr. Chen would have access to one spot. The remaining time, both spots would be available for David and Sarah's use. Marcus shook his head. No deal. The will specifies equal sharing of common areas. What you're proposing gives David 75% usage. That's not equal. The will doesn't specify exact percentages, Steinberg countered. It leaves room for practical arrangements based on actual need and use. Then let's talk about actual need, Marcus said, standing to refill his coffee, forcing them to wait. I have one car granted, an expensive one that requires secure parking. David and Sarah have 2 cars. By pure mathematics, an equal split would give me one spot full-time and them one spot full-time. I'm not even asking for that. I'm asking for predictable, reasonable access. David's face flushed. That car is a liability. Do you know what it's doing to our insurance rates, just having it here? That's a building expense to be shared equally, like all common area costs, Marcus replied smoothly. I'm happy to pay my half. The conversation continued in circles for another 20 minutes, with Steinberg trying various angles and Marcus calmly rejecting each unfair proposal. Finally, the lawyer's demeanor shifted, becoming less conciliatory. Dr. Chen, I'll be frank. If we can't reach an agreement, my client is prepared to pursue a partition action, force a sale of the property. Neither of you walks away with the brownstone, but at least the ... Irritation is resolved. Marcus had been expecting this threat. Lisa had warned him it might come to this, the nuclear option where both brothers would lose their grandfather's carefully preserved legacy. You'd sell Grandpa's building out of spite. Marcus asked David directly. The place he bought when everyone said Brooklyn was finished, the investment he was most proud of. David couldn't meet his eyes. You're the one who made this adversarial. No, Marcus said firmly. I made it equal. There's a difference. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Check your email. Now. Marcus excused himself, stepping into the kitchen to read Lisa's message on his laptop. The subject line made him smile. Security footage you requested. The email contained a video file and a brief note. Amazing what proper enhancement can reveal. The reflection in the coffee shop window across the street shows more than you'd think. Marcus opened the video, watching the enhanced footage that showed, reflected in the storefront glass, a clear image of someone keying the Lamborghini. The figure was partially obscured, but the clothing was distinctive of a Hermes scarf Sarah had worn that day, visible in the security footage from the brownstone's front entrance at the same timestamp. He returned to the living room, laptop in hand. Before we discuss partition actions, there's something you should see. Marcus turned the screen toward them, playing the enhanced footage. Steinberg's expression shifted from confident to concerned as he watched. David went pale. That could be anyone, David stammered. With that specific $1,200 scarf that Sarah posted about on Instagram the day before, Marcus asked. The same scarf visible in your building security footage? I don't think so. Steinberg leaned back, reassessing. What do you want, Dr. Chen? What I've always wanted. Fair access to shared property. But now, I also want reimbursement for the vandalism, $3,200 for the repair. Plus the insurance deductible. And a written agreement that any future damage to my property will result in immediate criminal charges. This is extortion, David said weakly. This is consequence, Marcus corrected. You escalated. I responded. Now we can either continue this destructive path, or we can act like adults who shared DNA and a grandfather who loved us both. The room fell silent. Outside, Brooklyn was waking up, garbage trucks rumbling past, dogs barking, the endless rhythm of city life. Inside the brownstone their grandfather had bought with cash from his first successful year in business. Two brothers faced each other across a divide that seemed both vast and petty. It was Steinberg who broke first. My client needs to discuss this privately. May we use your dining room? Marcus gestured permission, and the two men huddled at the table, whispering urgently. He could see David's shoulders sagging, the fight draining out of him as his lawyer presumably explained the legal realities. After 10 minutes, they returned. David looked older somehow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the early hour. Okay, David said quietly. Equal access. Week on, week off. You get both spots your week, we get both spots ours. Clean slate on the vandalism if you delete that video. And future incidents. Marcus prompted. No future incidents, David said, the words seeming to pain him. From either side, Marcus extended his hand. After a long moment, David shook it. The grip was firm but brief, perfunctory rather than fraternal. I'll have the formal agreement drawn up by end of day, Steinberg said, gathering his papers. Both parties will need to sign and have it notarized. After they left, Marcus stood in his apartment, feeling oddly deflated. He'd won, achieved exactly what he'd wanted, but the victory felt hollow. This wasn't how family was supposed to work, with lawyers and threats and carefully documented agreements. He thought about calling his grandfather's sister, Aunt Linda, the family peacemaker who lived in San Francisco. But she'd been through enough family drama. Let her remember her nephews as the close brothers they'd once been, not the litigants they'd become. Instead, Marcus finished preparing for work, dressing in the new scrubs with Mount Sinai's logo. As he headed to the garage where the Lamborghini waited, he passed Mrs. Rodriguez watering her plants. Morning, doctor, she said with a knowing smile. Quite the show the other day. Family disputes, Marcus said diplomatically. Hopefully resolved now. Hum. She adjusted her glasses, studying him. Your grandfather used to say the best deals were when nobody was completely happy, but everyone could live with it. Sounds like Grandpa, Marcus agreed. He also said family was complicated but worth preserving, even when they drive you crazy. Marcus nodded, understanding the gentle admonishment. I'll keep that in mind, Mrs. Rodriguez. The drive to Mount Sinai was smooth, the Lamborghini drawing stares and phone cameras as always, but Marcus barely noticed, his mind still on the morning's confrontation. He'd proven his point, established boundaries, refused to be bullied. So why did he feel like he'd lost something? His phone rang through the car's Bluetooth, Lisa calling to check in. How'd it go? She asked. We reached an agreement. Week on, week off, like I wanted. But, she could read his tone even over the phone. But I basically had to threaten my brother with criminal charges to get him to agree to basic fairness. That's not exactly a hallmark of healthy family dynamics. Lisa sighed. Marcus, some people only understand force. You tried reasoning with him, and he responded by damaging your property. You did what you had to do. I know. It just, ... This isn't what Grandpa would have wanted. Your grandfather left you that car for a reason, Lisa reminded him. He knew David would try to dominate. The Lamborghini wasn't just a gift, it was a test. Would you stand up for yourself, or let David walk all over you? Marcus hadn't thought of it that way, but it made sense. James Chen had been a strategic thinker, always 3 moves ahead. Had he foreseen this conflict? Had he deliberately created a situation where Marcus would have to assert himself? Thanks, Lisa, send me your bill. Already did, and Marcus, you did the right thing. Sometimes doing right doesn't feel good. At the hospital, Marcus threw himself into the familiar rhythm of medicine. Here, in the controlled chaos of the emergency department, things made sense. Symptoms had causes, treatments had protocols, and success could be measured in lives saved and suffering eased. His attending, Dr. Patricia Williams, was a legend in emergency medicine, tough but fair, with an encyclopedic knowledge and zero tolerance for ego. She sized up Marcus within minutes. Johns Hopkins, right. Good program. But this is New York. Forget whatever pace you're used to and double it. Triple it on weekends. The day flew by in a blur of traumas, cardiac events, and the usual collection of urban medical mysteries. Marcus sutured, lacerations, set fractures, and talked a teenager through a panic attack that had convinced him he was dying. Each patient was a puzzle to solve, a life to improve, a reminder of why he'd chosen this path. During a brief lull, he checked his phone. 2 messages waited, one from Steinberg with the parking agreement attached, and one from David. David's message was brief: signed the agreement. It's done. Hope you're happy. Marcus started to type a response, then deleted it, started again, deleted again. What was there to say? That he wished things were different. That he missed the brother who used to teach him to ride a bike and sneak him extra dessert. That success felt lonely when it came at the cost of family. In the end, he sent nothing. Some distances couldn't be crossed with text messages. His shift ended at midnight, the hospital finally quieting as the city settled into its restless sleep. Marcus changed out of his scrubs, noting the bloodstains on the sleeve, a reminder that real problems bled, while parking disputes were just expensive inconveniences. The Lamborghini waited in the hospital garage, incongruous among the sensible sedans and SUVs of medical staff. Marcus sat in the driver's seat for a moment, not starting the engine, just thinking. Tomorrow was his week for the brownstone parking. The spots would be empty, waiting for him to claim his hard-won territory. But he knew he'd only use one. The second spot would sit empty, a monument to stubbornness and fractured brotherhood. He drove home through empty streets, the engines growl echoing off building faces. Back at the brownstone, both the BMW and Range Rover were gone, David and Sarah making the most of their final night of dual parking. Marcus pulled into his spot, then sat looking at the empty space beside him. On impulse, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through old photos until he found the one he wanted, him and David at their grandfather's 80th birthday party. Arms around each other's shoulders, genuine smiles on their faces. Before the inheritance, before the resentment, before the lawyers. He sent the photo to David with a simple message: remember this, I miss this. The response came faster than expected. Me too. 3 dots appeared, suggesting David was typing more, but then they vanished. The conversation ended there, suspended between what was said and what couldn't be. Marcus locked the Lamborghini and headed inside. The brownstone was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now, not peaceful but careful. Like the silence after an argument when everyone's choosing their words. In his apartment, Marcus poured a glass of his grandfather's favorite whiskey, another inheritance. This one freely given, and sat in the old man's reading chair. The parking agreement lay on the coffee table, signed and notarized, a legal monument to family dysfunction. But there was also David's text, me too. 2 words that suggested maybe, possibly, the wounds weren't fatal. Maybe time would soften the edges, blur the battle lines. Maybe someday they'd laugh about the time Marcus had David's car towed, the way they now laughed about childhood squabbles that had seemed earth-shattering at the time. Or maybe not. Maybe this was their relationship, now carefully scheduled, legally documented, separate but equal. Marcus raised his glass to the photo of his grandfather on the mantel. You complicated bastard, he said affectionately. You knew this would happen, didn't you? You knew that car would cause problems, but you also knew I needed to cause those problems, needed to stop being the little brother who accepted whatever David decided. The photo, of course, didn't answer, but Marcus imagined his grandfather's voice. Gruff with age but warm with affection. Sometimes you gotta fight for your spot in the world, kiddo, even if it's just a parking spot. Outside, Brooklyn slept fitfully, sirens and car alarms punctuating the night. Inside the brownstone that had become a battlefield and might, with time and patience, become a home again. Marcus Chun closed his eyes and let the whiskey warm him. The war was over. Whether peace would follow remained to be seen. But for tonight, the Lamborghini was safely parked, the agreement was signed, and 2 brothers had admitted, however briefly, that they missed what they'd lost. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in families, as in medicine, sometimes a start was all you needed, a tiny opening where healing could begin. Slow and painful but possible. The scars would remain, but scars were just proof that wounds could close. That what was broken could, with time and care, mend. Marcus finished his whiskey and headed to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patience, new opportunities to save lives and make a difference. The parking spot would be there, legally his, hard-won and slightly bitter. But maybe, just maybe, he'd text David. Something simple, unrelated to parking or property or inheritance. Something fraternal and normal, and unburdened by legal documentation. Maybe he'd ask if David wanted to grab coffee. Not to negotiate or argue or rehash old grievances, just to sit across from each other and remember that before they were adversaries, they were brothers. The Lamborghini could wait in its spot, a bright orange reminder that some battles were worth fighting. But the real victory wouldn't be measured in parking schedules or legal agreements. It would be measured in the space between me two and whatever came next.